Hello, everyone. Welcome to the child abuse and prevention training. Just a quick disclaimer, this can be a very triggering topic. If you need to take time to take care of yourself during the training, please do so. Kind of give a thumbs up if you're good and can take care of yourself, or give a thumbs down if you would like a support staff member to follow you out and make sure you're doing well. Definitions. We're first going to start with the definition of a child. The United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child defines a child as a human being younger than 18 unless majority under the law applicable to the child is attained earlier. Child abuse is any deliberate behavior or action that endangers the child's health, survival, well-being, and development. There are 4 types of child abuse: physical, emotional, sexual, and neglect. Child exploitation. Child exploitation is the use of children for someone else's economic or sexual advantage, gratification, or profit, often resulting in unjust, cruel, and harmful treatment of the child. Domestic abuse/violence, a pattern of behavior in any relationship focused on gaining or maintaining power and control over another person. With the domestic abuse and violence, abuse can be physical, sexual, emotional, economic, or psychological actions or threats that influence another person. Behavior can include tactics that aim to frighten, intimidate, terrorize, manipulate, hurt, humiliate, blame, injure, or wound someone. Anyone can be a victim of domestic abuse regardless of age, race, gender, sexual orientation, faith, class, or education. Typically, domestic abuse is a pattern of abusive behavior towards an intimate partner in a dating or family situation, but can include children or other relationships such as roommates, and although rare, can be an isolated event. Because staff and campers live together and hold temporary residence at camp, occurrences of abuse and violence at camp are considered domestic. However, domestic abuse and violence is typically repetitive, and one instance does not equate to domestic abuse/violence, but actions typically associated with abuse and violence are no tolerance policies at camp. Just to clarify, no tolerance policy is unacceptable action that results in ejection from the program. In the case with staff, they are terminated, and with campers, they are sent home. All right, the stats. What we know today: 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys in the U.S. experience sexual abuse by the age of 18. 90% of children who are abused know the abuser. There are more than 42 million survivors of sexual abuse in the U.S., yet many child victims may never disclose their abuse. 1 in 5 children are solicited sexually on the internet before the age of 18. Yet, when adults collectively understand the risks and red flags of child sexual abuse, we can do more to keep kids safe. When we all take action, abuse is preventable. All right, now we're going to move more on to types of abuse and kind of narrowing down what abuse can look like. To start, we have physical abuse. And just to clarify, this kind of expands on what we were talking about earlier with the 4 types of child abuse: physical, emotional, sexual, and neglect. This section kind of more so expands on what those abuse mechanisms can look like and defining a little bit more intricate ideas of abuse. Physical abuse. The use of physical violence or threats of it to maintain power over an individual. Emotional abuse, non-physical behaviors that are meant to control, isolate, or frighten someone. Financial abuse, when an abusive partner extends their power and control into their partner's situation. Digital abuse, the use of technology and the internet to bully, harass, stalk, intimidate, or control a partner. Sexual abuse, when a partner controls the physical and sexual intimacy in a relationship. Sexual coercion, continuous sexually aggressive behavior. It can range from begging and persuasion to forced sexual contact. Reproductive coercion, when one partner strips another of the ability to control their own reproductive system. Stalking, when someone watches, follows, or harasses you repeatedly, making you feel afraid or unsafe. Moving a little bit more into sexual abuse and defining that a little bit more, just because it is so important for child safety. There are two types of sexual abuse: contact and non-contact abuse. And sexual abuse can also happen online or in person. With contact abuse, it's specifically where an abuser makes physical contact with a child. This contact can include touching, kissing, oral sex, but just so you know that like sexual abuse isn't always penetrative. And then with non-contact abuse, it's more revolves around the child being abused without being touched by the abuser, and this can be in person or online. Examples of this are like sexual correspondences between an adult. And then in addition to that, non-contact abuse can also look like exposing or flashing, showing pornography, exposing the child to sexual acts, making them masturbate, forcing a child to make, view, or share child abuse images or videos, making, viewing, or distributing child abuse images and videos, or forcing a child to take part in sexual activities or conversations online through a smartphone. More examples just for contact abuse, just to make sure we're covering that properly, is sexual touching of any part of a child's body, whether they're clothed or not, using a body part or object to rape or penetrate a child, forcing a child to take part in sexual activities, making a child undress or touch someone else. All right, moving forward with some more types of abuse, there's also social abuse, which in my eyes is kind of very closely linked with emotional abuse, but it's still separate in a way. It is behavior that aims to cut you off from your family, friends, or community. It can also involve a person or people trying to damage your relationships with others. And that is for the same reason why it ties so closely with emotional abuse, is because when doing those like social abuse factors, it causes, like emotional abuse as well. They are very closely related together. If someone's cutting you off from people you want to see, you're going to have an inherent emotional reaction to that. Bullying is a kind of a form of social abuse. It's unwanted aggressive behavior that involves a real or perceived power imbalance. And then some other types of abuse to consider are spiritual abuse. Spiritual abuse happens when someone uses spiritual or religious beliefs to hurt, scare, or control you. Sexism, prejudice, stereotyping, or discrimination typically against women based on sex. Heterosexism, discrimination or prejudice against gay people on the assumption that heterosexuality is the normal sexual orientation. Homophobia, dislike or prejudice against gay people, but due to being uncomfortable around gay people. Immigration status, the family-based immigration process in the U.S. Requires citizens and lawful permanent residents to file a petition for their non-citizen family members. And some petitioners may misuse the immigration process to further abuse their non-citizen family members by threatening or withholding the petition in order to control, coerce, or intimidate them. And then use of children is, I would say, something we're not going to see directly at camp, but a disclosure surrounding that might be a child's kind of explaining that this situation is happening in their household. But that also kind of goes for all of these types of abuse. But use of children as an abusive mechanism is when a partner utilizes children as an abusive mechanism to exert power and control over the other partner. Example, like the abuser will threaten to harm or take custody of the children if the partner leaves the relationship. All right, we also have to consider identities and intersectionality in terms of abuse. As we learned from our DEI training, minorities are more likely to undergo discrimination, and because of this, identities can be weaponized in abuse, and minorities are more likely to be in abusive situations. So just to reiterate, an identity is an aspect of an individual that amounts to who they are, whether it's race, gender, sexuality, or something else. Intersectionality is the overlapping of our identities that make up an individual, and intersectionality and identities can be used and weaponized by an abuser. And then just to reiterate again, intersectionality and identities can be a foundation for abuse. Typically too, with this, it's more in relation to that social abuse, where how we would probably see it at camp is using those identities to create exclusion. And we want to be like, when our campers are doing that, that's like something we want to like cut in the butt right away. Everybody is like welcome here within the Y, and that's the mission we live by. So we also want to promote that. And when that exclusion comes up, whether or not it's bullying or mimics some sort of abuse, we want to put an end to that, because that is going to be making sure everyone is included is going to be the foundation for creating that safe place at camp. Here is a social media and online abuse personal story that gets shared in the DEI training. I am unaware of it, so for now we're just gonna kind of skip that slide. Important thing just to know here is that with social media and the internet is that abuse does happen there, and part of the reason we don't allow technology at camp is because of that abuse, whether it's camper to camper or more drastic staff to camper relationships being able to happen online. So that's kind of the reason we don't allow technology at camp or contact of youth outside the camping realm. All right, now we're going to move more on to neglect. So there are 4 types of neglect, and we'll start with physical, which is a child's basic needs, such as food, clothing, or shelter, are not met, or they aren't properly supervised or kept safe. Educational neglect, a parent doesn't ensure their child is given an education. Emotional neglect, a child doesn't get the nurture and stimulation they need. This could be through ignoring, humiliating, intimidating, or isolating them. And medical neglect, a child isn't given proper health care. This includes dental care and refusing or ignoring medical recommendations. Something very important to note about neglect is that with, going back to our identities and our intersectionality, families that aren't as well off may not be able to provide, as many good, like, healthy food options or like brand new clothes. And although that resembles physical neglect, it's not necessarily is neglect, because those families are still doing everything they can to provide for their children. And when we talk about identifying neglect, we have to be very careful about, ensuring that it's poor home situation or true neglect. With that sexual abuse kind of thing, there's also child trafficking, which is where children and young people are tricked, forced, or persuaded to leave their homes and are moved or transported and then exploited, forced to work, or sold. Trafficked children may experience many types of abuse and neglect. Traffickers use physical, sexual, and emotional abuse as a form of control. Children and young people are also likely to be physically and emotionally neglected and may be sexually exploited. Just to recap, children are often trafficked for sexual exploitation, benefit fraud, forced marriage, domestic slavery like cleaning, cooking, and childcare, forced labor in factories or agriculture, committing crimes like begging, theft, working on cannabis farms, or moving drugs. In a quick nutshell, what grooming is setting up a child to be accepting of abuse when it happens and conditioning them for moments of abuse to make them believe it's normal. So within grooming, an adult may seek out and pay extra special attention to a child, act overly interested in a child, buy them gifts or treats, touches or hugs them in front of trusted adults, which makes the child think the touching is okay, finds out what the child likes and their interests are, and then flatters the child by claiming to have the same likes and interests, pretends to be a good friend to the child, even best friends, and acts as a sympathetic listener when the child is upset. They try to find ways to be alone with the child, tells the child dirty jokes or shows them pornography, grooms parents to gain more access to the child, such as offering to babysit or transport the child. And then all of these above behaviors can also happen online too, which is why that online realm is so important with not allowing technology at camp, and not using our own personal technology with campers. Now we're going to move more on to the signs and symptoms of abuse, so we kind of know what to look for if we think our campers may be going through abuse. Identifying abuse, we're going to look at the power and control wheel. So just a little recap on kind of what we just talked about. Holistically, all forms of abuse utilize a pattern of actions and behaviors to gain or maintain power and control over another. Common abusive tactics we can look for, whether it's we see them at camp or we hear about them from our campers' home lives, is coercion and threats, which is kind of making and or carrying out threats to bring harm or ill will towards the victim, so the victim does not want the abuser We're going to retake this one too. Slide 15. Identifying abuse, looking at our power and control wheel. So just what we just talked about. To recap it a little bit, holistically, all the forms of abuse, including the ones we talked about, utilize a pattern of action and behaviors to gain or maintain power and control over another. Some common tactics to look out for, whether we see them at camp or we hear about them from campers in their personal home lives, are coercion and threats, which are making and or carrying out threats to bring harm or ill will towards the victim, so the victim does what the abuser is asking. Intimidation, which is creating fear by alluding to harm by creating fear by alluding to harm or other repercussions through gestures, actions, or words, such as smashing an object within the vicinity of the victim. Emotional abuse, what we kind of talked about a little bit before, making the victim believe they are worthless would be a good example of that. Creating isolation. An example would be preventing or interfering in the victim's social interactions. Another common tactic is minimizing, denying, and blaming. Example of this would be the abuser denying their abusive actions, the abuser blaming the victim for the abuser's actions, the abuser minimizing what the victim is feeling, or an abuser minimizing the gravity of their actions. Using children to create threats. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Great example is threatening custody. Using an identity of the majority to diminish identities of the minority. Example, declaring someone unworthy because they are not male. And then finally, like economic abuse. Example would be creating a reliance on or exerting control over a victim's finances so that they become reliable or made to believe they can't leave the abuser because that is their financial support. Physical abuse is very important at camp. Not only do we not want to be enacting physical abuse on our campers, but also these are things we kind of want to look at that they bring from home. If they show up to camp with these things, it's kind of a red flag for abuse. This includes bruises, swelling, broken or fractured bones, bruising, burns or scalds, breathing problems, bite marks, seizures, unusual scarring, vomiting, the effects of poisoning such as vomiting, drowsiness or seizures, breathing problems from drowning, suffocation or poisoning, behavior such as being irritable or not feeding properly. Some possible signs and symptoms of physical abuse are behavioral depression, anxiety, withdrawal or aggression, self-destructive or self-harming behavior, developmental delays, suicide attempts, engaging in drug or alcohol use, overtly complainant, too well-mannered, too neat and clean, displays attention-seeking behaviors, or displays extreme inhibition in play. Now, I think it's very important to take time to note here that just because a camper shows up with one of these things or exhibits one of the signs or symptoms does not mean they're being abused. Kids get injured all the time. It's part of being a kid and part of playing. Like, you're going to get a few bruises. What is concerning is more so when multiple of these signs and symptoms show up, then that's more of an indicator for abuse. One thing, that's like a one-off, probably an accident thing. For example, I had a camper with some pretty torn up shoes. He wasn't being abused. His mom sent him to camp with camp shoes because she didn't want his brand new shoes to get ruined. But the point was, I kind of asked him about the shoes, and then he informed me of that story. So just, we don't want to, call out abuse right away. We want to make sure what we're identifying as abuse is actually abuse, because, calling in a report can really ruin someone's life and a family's life. All right, moving on to emotional abuse. This can look like humiliating or constantly criticizing a child, threatening, shouting at a child or calling them names, making the child the subject of jokes or using sarcasm to hurt the child, blaming and scapegoating, making a child perform degrading acts, not recognizing a child's own individuality or trying to control their lives, pushing a child too hard or not recognizing their limitations, exposing a child to upsetting events or situations like domestic abuse or drug taking, failing to promote a child's social development, not allowing them to have friends, persistently ignoring them or being absent, manipulating a child, never saying anything kind, expressing positive feelings, or congratulating a child on success, never showing any emotions in interactions with a child, also known as emotional neglect. Possible signs and symptoms of emotional abuse are the child seems confident or has a lack of self-assurance. They have a struggle to control their emotions or have difficulty making or maintaining relationships, and they can even act in a way that's inappropriate for their age. So with social abuse, like emotional abuse, kind of looks like prevention from seeing friends, family, or other people, prohibiting access outside one's home, room, or accommodation facility, prohibiting participation in social and community activities, a need to be aware of everything, everywhere you have been going or are going, a need to know everyone you have seen or are going to see, checking or interfering with your mail, phone, email, or social media, sharing private photos or videos online without your permission, spreading lies or damaging information online or in person, telling lies to turn others against you, deliberate action to make you miss or be late to events, appointments, or meetings, deliberate action to make you look bad or embarrass you in front of others or online, restricting access to transportation, including mobility aids, bullying, emotional and psychological abuse, and then weaponization of one's intersectionality or identity. And then possible signs and symptoms of social abuse include apprehension to participate in social meetings, gatherings, activities, or events, a negative change in performance, a change in demeanor, being nervous, a loss of confidence, becoming distressed or withdrawn, asking for or stealing items. An example would be money to give to their bully or whoever to appease them. A change in eating or sleeping habits, bullying others, belongings getting lost or damaged. That one's typically a sign that someone is bullying them. Fear of the bullies or abusers' behavior and kind of worrying that, like, oh, if I do this, then my bully or abuser is going to do that. Making excuses for the abuser's poor behavior, belief that they need to change something about themselves, avoiding conflict to prevent the abuser/bully from getting angry. And then I would say it's also important to note that, like, with emotional and social abuse, these things can also happen online as much as they would happen in person over the course of the summer, because we don't use technology at camp. It is important that a child, like, that this does happen online, and a child might disclose online abuse to you. Signs and symptoms of sexual abuse. So emotional and behavioral signs of sexual abuse are avoid being alone with or frightened of people or a person they know, indication that that person might be abusing them. Language or sexual behavior you wouldn't expect them to know. The idea behind that is that that abuser is teaching them those things. Having nightmares or bedwetting, psychological response to it, alcohol or drug misuse, self-harm, changes in eating habits or developing an eating problem, changes in mood, feeling irritable and angry, or anything out of the ordinary. Physical signs include bruises, bleeding, discharge, pains, or soreness in their genital or anal area, sexually transmitted infections, pregnancy. Children and young people might also drop hints and clues about the abuse. This one is very hard to identify. As staff, we don't expect you to be, checking for physical signs of sexual abuse. There's no reason you should be, like, looking at a camper's body or their undergarments to determine if they're being sexually abused. It crosses a line that in its own is weird and almost a form of sexual abuse. But I think the most important thing to remember is that we're not looking for a camper to disclose abuse. If anything, as far as we're going to go, is we notice signs of abuse and then kind of ask them about it and let them tell us. Signs and symptoms of neglect. One of these include housing and family issues, living in an unstable home environment, such as having no heating, being left alone for a long time, or taking on the role of a caregiver for other family members as, at a young age. Change in behavior can look like becoming clingy, becoming aggressive, being withdrawn, depressed, or anxious. Changes in eating habits, displaying obsessive behavior, finding it hard to concentrate or take part in activities, missing school, showing signs of self-harm, using drugs or alcohol. And then poor appearance and hygiene is also a symptom of neglect. This can look like being smelly or dirty, being hungry or not given money for food, having unwashed clothes, having the wrong clothing, such as no warm clothes in winter, having frequent and untreated nappy rash in infants, and then moreover, health and development problems, anemia or body issues such as poor muscle tone or prominent joints, thin or swollen tummy, weight or growth issues, are all signs of neglect, along with medical or dental issues, missed medical appointments such as for vacations, not given the correct medicines, poor language or social skills, regular illness or infections, repeated accidental injuries, often caused by lack of supervision or untreated injuries, skin issues such as sores, rashes, flea bites, scabies, or ringworm, and then finally tiredness. If a child is being or has been sexually abused online, they might spend a lot more or a lot less time than usual online texting, gaming, or using social media. They might seem distant, upset, or angry after using the internet or texting, be secretive about who they are talking to and what they're doing online or their mobile phone, or they have lots of new phone numbers, texts, or email addresses on their mobile phone, laptop, or tablet. All right. Now we're going to take a look at how grooming and abuse kind of looks like in play, and like a real situation that happened within the Y. Michael Todd Pegram faced criminal charges and pleaded guilty to first-degree sex offense and indecent liberties with a child last year and is serving a 30-year prison sentence at Alexander Correctional Institution in Taylorsville, North Carolina, according to the North Carolina Department of Police Safety. Pegram was a counselor at North Carolina YMCA camp that would invite select boys into a group he called Todd's Thunderbirds. These boys would go on special trips and receive special privileges from Todd in order to groom them and their families for sexual abuse. Pegram was very charismatic with a larger-than-life personality. He also befriended the parents of these young boys and used the YMCA to facilitate his agenda. He manipulated these boys and their families, gained their trust, and took advantage of them. Pegram handpicked his favorite boys for his counseling group and made sure they were revered by others, according to the complaint. He also reportedly owned a DJ company and often hired them to work for him. The YMCA gave him access to their facilities in vans after hours, and he hosted sleepovers, took the boys camping and to the beach, and on one occasion, picked up male strippers, attorneys for the men said in the lawsuit. He reportedly used the media room to show them porn. Pegram invited the boys to spend the night at his house, where they roughhoused with inappropriate grabbing and touching. He showered with them and sexually abused one in the YMCA's hot tub. The complaint makes the claims for negligence and infliction of emotional distress against the YMCA entities, saying they failed to properly supervise Pegram and didn't intervene after parents said something about his behavior. We will not let the behaviors go unchecked. If you suspect that someone is attempting to groom the environment or campers, either directly report it to your supervisor or use the risk management portal to submit a report. If someone is suspected of grooming, they will likely be placed on suspension and investigated, removing them from the scope of children immediately. Now we're going to look at preventing the occurrence and accusation of child abuse. Partially of why this is so important gets back to the Pegram story that we just talked about, with the YMCA not interfering when parents had concerns. So now when it comes to that, our policies are more updated and immediate action does take place. And no matter what the accusation is, like a staff member will be put on, will be suspended until an investigation is complete. So it's also very important that you are ensuring that you're not going to be accused of abuse or neglect, but also important that we're preventing it from happening in the first place, which is more important. All right, how to protect yourself from an accusation. This we're going to kind of look at like the basis of like bare minimum of what we should be doing to make sure we're not caught up in an accusation of child abuse. The first most important rule at all times, you must do this, is the rule of three. The rule of three essentially means there must be at least 3 people present within one group. Two kids should never be on their own. A staff member and a child should never be on their own. It's weird, it's gross, it looks bad. By being in a group of 3, you are able to ensure that no one lies and kind of, frames you to be this abuser, you will, if one person claims that you have done that, then the third person of that group is able to be like, actually, no, that didn't happen, and it will match your story, hopefully. But also, like, important, just like safety precautions in terms of like neglect too, is that we also travel in those groups of 3 so that if someone were to get injured, one person could stay and take care of the victim while the other person runs and gets help. If you are ever not in a group of 3, immediately get on your radio. Camp is pretty small. You could probably shout out and someone will hear you to like just come over so that you can be in that group of 3 so that you are protecting yourself and protecting the camper. Some of our big do nots is do not use your phones during camp unless it's been approved by our leadership team. This is to prevent kids from seeing things that they shouldn't, and also to protect you from, getting accused of doing something wrong. One of the main reasons for this is like that we're not taking pictures of kids, but also because that's gross. Why are we taking pictures of kids? But also we don't want to be exposing them to things that they shouldn't. And we all know that sometimes things pop up on our phone that we didn't intend to happen. Don't ever give special gifts to children. Never make social media connections with campers, including Rising Stars, LITs, and CITs. That's very important. Although they are like closer to adulthood and we may, bond with them a little more and see more eye to eye, they are still minors at the end of the day, and it's disgusting if you're contacting them outside of camp. Never solicit babysitting opportunities. If parents request, kindly decline and reference our child protection policies. Although there is one overarching exception to being able to be in contact with a child outside of camp, and that is if you've had contact or know that family before you started working with the Y. Obviously, personal lives can mesh in weird ways, so as long as you have known that family before working with the YMCA, it is okay to be maintaining that connection with that family. But if you meet a family because of camp, you are to not contact them in any way outside of camp. I think more importantly too, even if that camper that used to have turns 18, becomes an adult, pursuing a relationship with that person, even after they have become an adult, is weird and gross because you knew them as a minor, and it still is kind of a form of abuse through power and control. You used to have power and control over this person, and now that they're an adult, you still have that power and control because you knew them in that setting. The exception to that is if that camper were to start working at camp and you both were on staff together, then that person has become a staff member, is no longer a camper, and you have a professional relationship with them. So now we're going to look at some holistic prevention, what we can do in camp and what we can implement to really make sure that we're not accused of abuse, or make sure that we're ensuring that there's no abuse at camp. So one of the first things that we can do is discuss boundaries about like relationships, whether they're inappropriate or inappropriate, with our campers and staff. A perfect opportunity to do this would be Sunday night, when we get our campers for the first time and we're making those cabin agreements. We can talk about appropriate and inappropriate actions and relationships, camper to camper relationships, staff to camper relationships. And then throughout your summer at camp, at all times, you should be assessing the power dynamics between you and your campers, and the power dynamics between your campers themselves. So with camper to counselor relationships, it's very obvious that counselors hold more power and are more applicable to being able to abuse a camper. So knowing your power dynamics and taking precaution in navigating that so you can make decisions that are professional and not ones that mimic abuse, and knowing that like power struggle. And then with camper to camper dynamics, there may be like a really popular kid who's kind of like the leader of the social hierarchy within your group. So it's important to know that and make sure that bullying isn't happening out of those dynamics, and just kind of that kind of thing. And then you also want to create a safe space for campers that have been abused. This allows for safety within the program, for like emotional safety within the program, and can help to prevent either more abusive actions from taking place, or can prevent them from having like getting triggered from previous events. Most importantly, immediately report inappropriate actions to the camp director. And the intentions of campers and staff are unimportant. Mistreatment of any kind is child abuse. It's not your job to determine intention. It's your job to keep campers safe. This is so important. We have to hold each other accountable. Otherwise, we risk every child's safety. Just to shed light on this, importance, in a study conducted to assess the occurrence of child abuse within camping, convicted child abusers, quote, identified a camp environment as an excellent place in which to abuse children because most of the children are in a new environment and can be easily persuaded. The child was also in a situation where dependence was a very important factor, and these abusers used this dependence during the first few days to establish relationships with particular children. So, if we're not, reporting weird actions that each other are doing, or taking time to, really analyze if actions our peers are taking are appropriate, then we risk child safety through by letting abuse get by. Your director will ensure that there's a proper investigation and the proper things need to get done before that, before a decision is made. But it's always important to report it and build and give any information you can, so that if this behavior is repeated, there is written documentation that it is repetitive history, and we can holistically look at it and be like, oh, maybe this person shouldn't work at camp anymore. We also want to be creating a safe place for so our campers are comfortable disclosing abuse. Inform campers, all staff are mandated reporters. Do not lead or encourage a camper to disclose something. It could be seen as grooming. So when disclosures occur, great, awesome, a camper feels comfortable enough with us telling that. We shouldn't be prying for a camper to disclose something. And once a camper does disclose something, we shouldn't be asking for more and more and more information and trying to get as much information out of the child as possible. It's grooming. We're asking them to tell us something they may be hesitant to tell us. Part of this holistic prevention is reporting. So actions that you should handle and then report, we're going to go through first, and then we'll go through actions to immediately report without hesitation. A staff member is exclusively spending time with the same campers. That's weird. Why are they picking the same campers to spend time with, especially if it's not their own campers? And kind of showing that favoritism. Reporting that, again, if that behavior persists, it has been documented that it has been happening, and we're able to protect the child by having documentation that staff members' actions are weird. A staff member being alone with a camper. This one should be in actions to immediately report, but with this, the idea is that if you see a staff member alone with a camper, you're immediately going to go to that staff and that camp member and create that group of 3 to ensure nothing's happening. And then once you are no longer needed for that group of 3 because they've returned to a group where there are 3 or more people, then you should leave and report that. Because it's weird that for a staff member to be alone with a child. It's gross. Report any faults in supervision. Supervision is really huge. It is a form of neglect. Weaponizing an identity or intersectionality. If you feel comfortable talking about that realm of identity, go for it, have a conversation. But it does still need to get reported higher up because we don't allow xenophobia at camp. And it is grounds for being sent home. So also immediately report that after you have that discussion. If you're not comfortable with having that discussion, you can immediately report it and ask leadership to come have that discussion. Arguments between campers, it happens. I would report this based on severity and occurrence. If it's just like a minor argument, like, you took my colored pencil. No, I didn't. Handle it on your own. We don't need to, you don't need to report that. That kind of thing happens. We're more looking at like, bigger things like this group of girls keeps excluding this other girl, or this group of boys likes to play a game called butt tag, which has happened before, and reporting things like that, and like handling it by telling them to stop and having a conversation about why that's not appropriate, and then immediately reporting it, because that getting home, or not that getting home, but if we do nothing to stop it, then that is a form of neglect because it's inadequate supervision. Campers excluding each other, big one. I would say, report that if it's very consistent. If it's like a one-off thing, kind of whatever, handle it. Actions or tactics involving minimizing, denying, or blaming. This is kind of a form of gaslighting where we try to misconstrue reality to make the other person believe someone else. To handle this, just reassure the person who's experiencing the minimizing, denying, or blaming feels just in their emotions and they don't feel like that. And then report the situation. We want to ensure that before we are reporting stuff that we're not just like leaving our campers to emotional, physical, or mental distress just to go report something. We want to take care of their well-being. Actions to immediately report. A staff member's actions that are weird or out of character. Again, it's better to report something, trust your gut, than it is better to not report something and let abuse potentially happen. A staff member who's incapable of supervision, in my eyes, a great example of this is you notice that another staff member is under the influence. They are no longer able to take care of kids. By allowing them to take care of kids, it is a form of neglect because they are not astute enough to be able to take care of kids and are not in the right mindset to do so. Repetitive and or escalated incidents. So like, if the same kids keep arguing over and over again and it just keeps escalating and getting worse, that's something we're going to immediately report and get leadership to come talk to the kids about and kind of escalate that situation and be like, hey, last warning kind of thing. We're going to stop this. This is inappropriate behavior. It creates feelings of social abuse. Bullying, rumor mongering, physically inflicted harm. Threats are really big. If a child makes a very outrageous threat, like, it needs to get reported and we need to talk about why that's not an okay behavior. And then intimidation goes alongside that. Preventing neglect. Ensure campers are eating enough food, ensure campers are drinking enough water, ensure campers are applying sunscreen and bug spray, ensure campers are always properly supervised, ensure your interactions with campers are genuine, ensure campers are taking their medications, ensure injured and sick campers are properly taken care of, ensure incident reports are filled out in a timely manner, ensure campers feel socially included, ensure all campers equally receive your attention, report the lack of anything listed to ensure campers get what they need and to protect you from accusation. Preventing grooming. Do not ever be without the rule of 3. Do not contact campers outside of camp. Do not exercise favoritism. Do maintain a professional relationship with campers. Do create boundaries of professionalism with your campers. Do inform campers the differences between appropriate and inappropriate actions and reflections at camp. Report staff conducting an inappropriate behavior, oversharing aspects of their personal life, consistently spending time with the same campers, staff one-on-one with campers, staff that seemingly have a relationship beyond the bounds of typical camper to staff relationships, personal relationships with campers you feel are growing too close. Preventing bullying. Inform campers that bullying is a zero tolerance policy and that camp is a safe place. Discuss with your campers what bullying is and why it is not allowed at camp. Notify your campers to report any bullying so it can be handled properly. Notify your campers that reporting bullying will stop bullying even if the bully says otherwise. Notify your campers that the rule of 3 will help you prevent bullying. So aspects that you can handle and then report are socially or emotionally harmful camper-to-camper interactions or campers and staff disobeying the rule of 3. And then things to immediately report that leadership should be a part of in having a conversation is physically harmful camper-to-camper interaction, physically, emotionally, or socially harmful staff-to-camper interactions, weaponizing an identity or intersectionality, rumor spreading, and then preventing abuse. Inform your campers that you are a mandated reporter. Discuss with your campers appropriate and inappropriate actions and relationships. Notify your campers that camp is a safe space and to report any inappropriate actions or relationships to a staff member they are comfortable with. Notify campers the rule of 3 is for their safety. Ensure you are taking care of yourself as to not accidentally inflict abuse. Report staff conducting in inappropriate behavior. Staff one-on-ones with campers, consistently spending time with the same campers. Staff that seemingly have a relationship beyond the bounds of typical camper-to-staff relationships. Physically, socially, or emotionally distressing actions. And personal relationships with campers you feel are growing too close. When you notice that your relationship may be coming a little too close with a camper and that you need to take a step back from it, don't just do that, but tell someone that that's happening, specifically leadership. If you are able to document, hey, this camper is growing overly attached for me, I need help separating, I don't want to be accused of anything, these are not my intentions. Leadership will do what they need to ensure that there's space between you and that camper and that your relationship isn't becoming stays professional. Disclosing, recording, and reporting. So there's 4 different types of disclosure when it comes to abuse. There's a direct disclosure is when the child or young person directly says what is occurring. Indirect disclosure is when a child or young person does not share the details of abuse without being prompted or does so in a roundabout way. Disguised disclosure can be disguised, for example, being relayed through another person. Quote, my friend told me blank, end quote. Hints or gestures. A disclosure can be through hints or gestures where a young person may be relying on others to notice that something is wrong and ask them about what happened. Barriers of taking action when we learn of abuse. There are many reasons as to why people don't take action when they learn of abuse happening to someone. They don't want the abuse to escalate. Fear of retaliation. It's not that bad. They were abused to they were abused too. Financial implications, feeling responsible can all amount to someone not disclosing abuse. which also includes the thought that no one will believe them, a lack of support, shame, feeling responsible. If you have any of these thoughts when a disclosure happens, ask yourself one question: what could happen if I don't report it? And that gets back to the thing where with staff at camp, it is so important that if you see a staff member doing weird actions or something you might think that like models abuse or grooming, that it's immediately reported so that it can be properly looked into. It's not your job to be a sleuth when it comes to determining if a staff member is doing these actions. Your job is to make sure your kids are safe and your kids are taken care of. You can't do that if you're playing detective. So it's really important to let like leadership know what is going on and not taking a chance when it comes to the kids at camp. How to handle disclosures of abuse. Avoid denial. Believe what your child is telling you. Provide a safe environment. Make sure the setting is confidential and comfortable. Avoid communicating with shock, horror, or fear about anything said. Reassure the child that they did nothing wrong and that you believe them. Listen and don't make assumptions. Listen more than you talk and avoid advice giving or problem solving. Do not interrogate. Don't ask the child a lot of questions, especially leading questions, which means a question in which you provide a possible answer. Make no promises. This is so important. A child may ask you to be, oh, can you not tell anyone else? You are a mandated reporter. You cannot make that promise. You can tell the child what you're going to do. You can say, hey, I do have to do A, B, and C before with this information. And then you can also disclose that. If they like start to disclose something, you can stop them and be like, hey, just so you know, I like can't promise to keep this a secret and and may have to tell the correct people. I'm not gonna, rumor monger and tell everybody at camp, but I'm gonna tell the correct professionals what's occurring to ensure camper safety. Document exact quotes. Be supportive, not judgmental. Report any suspicion of child abuse and neglect. So important. With that too, we also want to be making sure that when we record the disclosure, it is professional and we're not like causing the child more distress. So as soon as possible following the disclosure, write down exactly what was said, where it was said, and the time it was said, kind of like when the disclosure happened. Write the facts, no speculation. Complete a report via the risk management portal and let your camp director know so they can support you through the process. It's okay that after the disclosure, if you don't get every single exact detail. What matters is that you do it very shortly after so that it's still fresh in your brain and you can convey as many details as possible. But we don't want to be writing all this down in front of the child because that is rude and can cause more distress for the child. Reporting. Child Protective Services must be called as soon as the incident report is done through their number. This call must be made by the person that received the disclosure. The director or another member of the support staff can be there to support through the process. Again, only share facts of what was said, where it was said, and the time that it was said. The representative will try to dig for information. Do not speculate. Following disclosures, it can be very hard to listen to the trauma the youth we serve go through. It is important that we go through the process. A part of that process might be your own processing of the situation. Support staff are here to support you through this. It is okay to not be okay. You are not alone in this process.